Police sirens pierced the evening silence in Waukegan, catching the attention of the few passers-by and making them slow down. An old apartment building on the corner of Grand Avenue and Jackson Street suddenly became the center of attention. The flashing lights of the patrol cars cast an ominous red and blue glow on the cracked facade of the building, which had been built in the 1970s. Detective Xavier Onyekwa parked his inconspicuous gray sedan behind the police van and paused for a moment, staring at the building. In his 20 years with the Waukegan Police Department, he had seen a lot, but each new call still evoked that special feeling of tension that never dulled with time. He slowly got out of the car, adjusted his tie, and headed for the entrance, where a young patrolman was already waiting for him. "Fourth floor, apartment 412, the patrolman reported, holding out a clipboard for his signature. "The victim is Leonard Bailey, male, 40 years old, multiple stab wounds. The body was discovered by his wife when she returned from work around 8 o'clock in the evening." Onyekwa nodded, signed the logbook, and headed for the elevator. The old mechanism creaked as it lifted him to the 4th floor, where forensic experts were already bustling about in the hallway. The detective pulled on latex gloves and shoe covers before stepping over the threshold of the apartment, which was marked with yellow tape. The metallic taste of blood hit his nostrils as soon as Onyekwa entered the small living room. Leonard Bailey's body lay between the kitchen area and the sofa as if he had been trying to escape from his attacker. A dark pool of blood spread across the cheap linoleum, soaking into the seams. The medical examiner, Dr. Ramos, was already examining the body. "What do we have here, Felipe?" Onyekwa asked, crouching down next to the examiner. 8 stab wounds, Ramos replied, pointing to the victim's chest and abdomen. 2 of them are probably fatal, penetrating the heart and lung. Death occurred approximately 6 to 7 hours ago, between 1 and 2 days ago. The attack was vicious, detective. This isn't just murder, it's rage. Onyekwa examined the body closely. Leonard Bailey was a sturdy man of medium height with short dreadlocks and a neat beard. He was wearing a plain t-shirt, now soaked with blood, and sweatpants. There were cuts on his right hand, defensive wounds, evidence that the victim had tried to defend himself. "The murder weapon?" asked the detective, getting to his feet. "Presumably a kitchen knife." Ramos pointed to the kitchen unit where the forensic team was already working. "One is missing from the set." The killer probably took it with him. Onyekwa slowly walked around the crime scene, noting details. Signs of a struggle were evident. An overturned coffee table, a broken vase, blood spatters on the wall. The small apartment was in disarray, but it was unclear whether this had been the case before the murder or was the result of it. "Where's the wife?" Onyekwa asked the patrolman, taking notes by the door. "In the apartment next door, 414. The neighbor took her in and gave her a sedative. The doctor has already examined her. There are no physical injuries." The detective nodded and continued his examination. On the kitchen table were 2 cups with coffee leftovers, one almost full, the other empty. The refrigerator was covered with magnets and notes typical of a married couple. One of them had the time of an appointment at the New Life Reproductive Health Clinic written on it. The forensic scientist in the corner of the room called Onyekwa over. "Detective, take a look. There are traces of blood on the bathroom floor. Someone tried to wash them away, but not very thoroughly." Onyekwa followed him into the small bathroom. There were indeed pinkish stains on the white tile floor and faint traces of blood in the sink drain. "Check the drain and all surfaces for DNA," the detective ordered. "And check the trash can. There may be bloody napkins or clothing there." Returning to the living room, Onyekwa noticed a stack of documents on the dresser. Glancing through them, he found medical reports, test referrals, and bills from the New Life Clinic. According to the documents, the Baileys had undergone in vitro fertilization, which, judging by the latest records, had been unsuccessful. "Gather all these documents," he said to the forensic expert, "especially the medical ones, and check the victim's phone if you find it." After completing his initial examination of the crime scene, Onyekwa decided to talk to the murdered man's wife. Before doing so, he approached the technical specialist who had already begun his work. "I need recordings from all the surveillance cameras in this building and within a 2-block radius," said the detective. "I'm particularly interested in the period from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and I also need to know when the wife actually returned home." The technician nodded and immediately set to work, connecting his laptop to his equipment. Onyekwa headed to the neighboring apartment to talk to Tammy Bailey. He knocked on the door, introduced himself, and was let in by an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Clark. In the small living room, a frail, dark-skinned woman sat on the sofa, her eyes swollen from crying. Her hands trembled as she clutched a cup of tea, which she apparently had not drunk. Tammy Bailey looked much older than her 35 years. Deep wrinkles lined her eyes and mouth, and her short hair showed early signs of gray. "Mrs. Bailey," Onyekwa began gently, sitting down across from her. "I'm Detective Xavier Onyekwa. My condolences. I understand this is a very difficult time for you, but I need to ask you a few questions to begin the investigation." Tammy looked up at him with reddened eyes and nodded slightly. "Please tell me what happened today. When was the last time you saw your husband alive?" Her voice was hoarse, as if she had been screaming a lot. "I left for work in the morning around 7. Leo was still asleep. He had his second shift at the supermarket today, starting at 3 in the afternoon. We didn't talk in the morning. We had a little argument yesterday, and I didn't want to wake him up." She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "I work at the MedPharma warehouse, finishing at 6. I was late today because of inventory. I came home around 8 and—" Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. "He was lying there, in a pool of blood. I tried to help him, shook him, called his name. Then I called 911 at 911. Onyekwa watched her closely, noting details. The absence of blood on her clothes, even though she said she had shaken her husband. The strange choice of words, lying in a pool of blood, rather than the more emotional description one might expect from someone who had found a loved one murdered. "Who did you talk to today? Who could have known you were staying late at work?" "My supervisor, Jamal. And I texted Leo that I'd be late, but he didn't reply. I thought he was at work and couldn't use his phone. Tell me about your husband. Did he have any enemies? Maybe conflicts at work or with someone he knew?" Tammy shook her head. "Leo was quiet, private. He didn't have many friends. He didn't like big groups. He had been working as a security guard at Save Mart for 5 years, no problems. Everyone loved him." She started crying again. "You mentioned that you had an argument yesterday. What was it about?" Tammy fell silent, her gaze becoming distant. "It's personal, family stuff. Nothing serious, just... We recently found out that our IVF procedure didn't work. Again, we've been trying to have a baby for 7 years. It's stressful." Onyekwa paused, giving her time to collect her thoughts, and then asked, "Mrs. Bailey, I need to know where you were today from the moment you left for work until you returned home. Every hour, if possible." "I was at work all day, from 7:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. Then I took the bus home. It took about 45 minutes. You can ask Jamal or the other warehouse employees." The detective nodded, making notes in his notebook. "Thank you, Mrs. Bailey. I'll need to talk to you again, but that's enough for now. You can stay with Mrs. Clark while we work in your apartment. If you remember anything important, call me anytime." He handed her his business card and left the apartment. A technician with a laptop was already waiting for him in the hallway. "Detective, I have the security camera footage from the entrance. I think you should see this." They walked together to the far corner of the hallway, where the technician opened his laptop and played the video. "Here, at 7:12 a.m., Tammy Bailey leaves the building." The technician pointed to the screen, where a woman could be seen hurrying toward the exit. "And here is the recording from 2 p.m. The same woman appeared on the screen, entering the building. Her gait was tense, her movements abrupt. "She returned home around 2 in the afternoon," the technician continued. "And here's the recording from 8 in the evening, when she allegedly discovered the body." In the new video, Tammy was entering the building again, but now her movements were slow, almost uncertain, judging by the time of death indicated by Dr. Ramos. Leonard Bailey was killed between 1 and 2 o'clock, and his wife returned home during that time, Onyekwa concluded, staring intently at the screen. Check the cameras in the area where she works too. I want to know if she was there all day, as she claims. Already on it, the technician nodded. And here's another oddity. We checked the cameras at the Save Mart supermarket where Leonard Bailey worked. He didn't show up there today, didn't clock in for his shift, and didn't call in to say he wouldn't be coming in. Onyekwa frowned. The picture was starting to come together, but he decided not to rush to conclusions. Okay, keep checking all the cameras. I want to know every move both Baileys made in the last 24 hours. Returning to the victim's apartment, Onyekwa saw that the forensic team had found something in the bedroom. Detective, take a look. One of the experts handed him a folder. We found this in the bedside table drawer, under a stack of books. Onyekwa opened the folder and saw medical records that were different from those on the dresser. They were old records, dated more than 10 years ago, from a clinic in Detroit. The patient's name on them was Leon Bailey. The diagnosis was gender dysphoria. Recommendations for hormone therapy and sex reassignment surgery. The detective studied the documents carefully. Now, a lot of things were becoming clear. Leonard Bailey was born a woman and had undergone a sex change many years before meeting Tammy. According to the documents, the transformation process had been completed more than 10 years ago. Pack this up as evidence, Onyekwa told the forensic scientist, and check if there are any other documents related to the victim's medical history. At that moment, another technician entered the apartment with a tablet in his hands. Detective, we checked the cameras in the MedPharma area. Tammy Bailey left her workplace around 12:30 p.m. and did not return. Her supervisor confirmed that she had asked for lunch break, citing poor health, and said she would return, but she did not. He tried to call her after 4 p.m., but her phone was turned off. Onyekwa nodded. The evidence was beginning to fit together. Tammy had lied about her whereabouts during the day. She returned home at the exact time when, according to the medical examiner's report, her husband was killed. Perhaps she had learned about Leonard's past. Perhaps because of the failed IVF procedure, which could have revealed his genetic characteristics. Keep an eye on her, the detective ordered. But don't tell her yet that we know she came back during the day. I need more evidence before I can charge her. Onyekwa walked around the apartment again, carefully examining every detail. Wet paper towels were found in the kitchen trash can, which tested positive for blood. In the bedroom, under the bed, he found a woman's blouse with faint bloodstains, neatly folded and hidden. The detective ordered all these items to be packed up as evidence. It was already nightfall when Onyekwa finished his work at the crime scene. Stepping outside, he took a deep breath of the cool air. The first phase of the investigation was complete, and tomorrow he would have to dig deeper. He had to talk to the doctor who performed the IVF procedure and find out exactly what Tammy knew about her husband's past. The whole picture was not yet clear, but the detective was already almost certain that Leonard Bailey's own wife was behind the knife attack, and the reason most likely lay in the medical documents they had found hidden in the bedroom. The morning was cloudy, with drizzling rain that turned the streets of Waukegan into a gray mess. Detective Xavier Onyekwa parked his car in front of a modern building with a sign that read, New Life, Center for Reproductive Medicine. The clinic stood in stark contrast to the dilapidated buildings surrounding it in the neighborhood. The glass facade, neat parking lot, and well-manicured bushes at the entrance suggested that the business was thriving. Onyekwa had spent a sleepless night reviewing the materials he had gathered on the Leonard Bailey case. The documents he had found about the victim's sex change and the failed IVF procedure pointed to a potential motive for the murder, but the detective needed more information. He was greeted in the clinic's reception area by a friendly administrator who, upon hearing the purpose of his visit, immediately informed him that Dr. Darwish would be able to see him in 15 minutes after finishing a consultation. While waiting in the lobby, Onyekwa looked at the photos of happy families with babies on the walls and the brochures about infertility treatment on the tables. Each image was a promise of a miracle for those who could not conceive a child naturally. A miracle that never happened for the Bailey family. Exactly 15 minutes later, he was invited into Dr. Nia Darwish's office. The 38-year-old woman with short curly hair and an elegant white coat greeted him with a handshake. "Detective Onyekwa, I understand this concerns the Bailey couple?" Dr. Darwish got straight to the point, pointing to the chair opposite her desk. "A terrible tragedy. I saw the news this morning." "Yes, doctor. I need your help." Onyekwa nodded, settling into the chair. "I'm investigating the murder of Leonard Bailey and would like to know about the IVF procedure you performed for the couple. I'm particularly interested in the last few weeks." Dr. Darwish sighed and, opening the patient file on her computer, began to explain. "Tammy and Leonard Bailey became our patients about 2 years ago. Tammy was diagnosed with idiopathic infertility, meaning there was no obvious cause. We conducted a complete examination of both spouses and recommended IVF. The first attempt was last year and was unsuccessful. The second was 3 months ago, also without success. The last one was completed 2 weeks ago, and we received a negative result." "How did the couple react to the failure?" asked the detective, taking notes in his notebook. "Tammy was devastated," replied the doctor, choosing her words carefully. "Motherhood had become an obsession for her over the years. She was willing to undergo any procedure, incur any expense. Leonard seemed more reserved, but he always supported her. After the third unsuccessful attempt, I suggested they consider other options, donor eggs or adoption. Tammy flatly refused, saying she only wanted her own biological child." Onyekwa nodded, then, after a pause, asked the key question. "Dr. Darwish, during our investigation, we discovered that Leonard Bailey underwent gender reassignment surgery more than 10 years ago. Were you aware of this?" The doctor's face changed. She looked away, then sighed heavily. "Yes, I knew. It was in his medical records, which he provided when he first came to see me. But according to medical ethics, I couldn't disclose this information without his consent, even to his spouse. Besides, Mr. Bailey made it clear that Tammy didn't know about his past and asked me to keep it confidential. But IVF requires the husband's sperm. How did you get around that?" "We used donor sperm," the doctor explained. "Leonard told Tammy that he had poor sperm quality, and they agreed to a donor who was similar to him in phenotype. Tammy didn't mind. The main thing for her was to carry and give birth to the child herself." Onyekwa watched the doctor closely, sensing that she was not telling him everything. "Dr. Darwish, I think something else happened, something that could have triggered the tragedy." The woman nervously adjusted the collar of her coat. 2 weeks ago, when I reported the unsuccessful outcome of the last procedure, there was an incident. Tammy was very upset and demanded an explanation as to why all 3 attempts had been unsuccessful. She began to accuse us of incompetence and demanded to see all the test results. During this emotional conversation, the doctor faltered, clearly feeling guilty. "I accidentally mentioned Mr. Bailey's chromosomal characteristics." "What exactly did you say?" "I said something like, 'We have taken into account all genetic characteristics, including your husband's chromosome set.' Tammy immediately became suspicious and started asking what I meant. I tried to rectify the situation by saying that this was a standard screening procedure for all donors, but she didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. She left very upset, and the next day Leonard called, extremely upset. He said that Tammy was demanding explanations and rummaging through his things, looking for some documents. Onyekwa frowned. This was exactly the information he was looking for, the point at which Leonard's secret had begun to be revealed to his wife. "Have you seen or spoken to either of them since that incident?" "No, I only received a message from Leonard 3 days ago. He wrote that Tammy had found his old medical records and now knew the truth. He was desperate, didn't know what to do next. I suggested they come in for a joint consultation with a psychologist, but I didn't get a response. The detective wrote down this information, then asked, "And one last question. Did you notice any signs of psychological instability, aggression, or a tendency toward violence in Tammy Bailey?" Dr. Darwish thought for a moment. Not directly, but her obsession with motherhood went beyond the normal desire to have a child. She said that her life had no meaning without a child, that she felt like an incomplete woman. When I offered psychological help, she refused, saying that she didn't need a psychologist, she needed a child. And yes, in moments of high stress, such as when she received negative results, she could be frighteningly intense. Once, she broke a glass by squeezing it in her hand. Onyekwa thanked the doctor for the information and left his business card, asking her to contact him if she remembered anything else. Leaving the clinic, he got into his car and called his partner, Detective Morales. "Ricardo, check the camera footage from the New Life Clinic area for the last 2 weeks. Look for Tammy Bailey. Also, check her phone records for the same period. I need to know who she communicated with after her visit to Dr. Darwish." The next step in the investigation was to check Tammy's activities on the day of the murder. Onyekwa went to MedPharma, where she worked. The warehouse manager, Jamal Wilson, confirmed that Tammy had asked for a lunch break, complaining of a headache, and had not returned. He also mentioned that over the past 2 weeks, she had become noticeably nervous, often asking for time off and twice failing to show up for work without warning. "What about yesterday?" Onyekwa asked. "She claims she worked all day until 8 p.m. Jamal looked at the detective in surprise. "No, she didn't come in at all yesterday. She called in the morning and said she wasn't feeling well. This is her 3rd absence in 2 weeks, and I was going to talk to her today." This confirmed Onyekwa's suspicions. Tammy had lied about her whereabouts on the day of the murder. Already having access to the surveillance camera footage, he asked the police technical department to check Tammy's movements for the previous day. An hour later, he received a report. The cameras had recorded Tammy leaving her house at 7 in the morning, then sitting in a cafe on the other side of town until noon, after which she returned home around 2 in the afternoon, the exact time Leonard was killed. She then left the house again at 5 in the evening and wandered aimlessly around the shopping center without going into any stores until 7:30, after which she returned home and called the police. Onyekwa decided to dig deeper into Leonard Bailey's past. Using the documents he found from the clinic in Detroit, he contacted the Detroit Police Department and requested any information about Leon Bailey, now Leonard. A few hours later, he received a call back informing him that they had found the address of Bailey's sister, Iman Calloway, who lived in the suburbs of Detroit. Onyekwa called her, introduced himself, and explained the situation. Iman was shocked by the news of her brother's death and agreed to come to Waukegan the next day. The detective offered to meet her at the train station. Iman Calloway arrived on an early train. She was a tall woman with a proud bearing, whose features bore a striking resemblance to Leonard's. Her eyes were red from crying, but she held herself together. They settled into a small cafe near the station. Onyekwa ordered coffee for both of them and delicately began the conversation. "Mrs. Calloway, please accept my condolences once again. I understand how difficult this is for you, but your help could be crucial to the investigation." Iman nodded, clutching the cup with trembling fingers. "Leo and I were always close, even when the transformation began. I supported him from the very beginning. Our parents didn't accept his choice and turned their backs on both of us when I took his side. But we made it through. Leo was strong and always knew what he wanted." "Did you know his wife, Tammy?" "Only through phone conversations. Leo met her after he moved here to Waukegan. He didn't tell her about his past. He said he was afraid of her reaction, that she was very traditional and dreamed of having children. I advised him to be honest, but he kept putting off the conversation." When was the last time you spoke to your brother? 3 days ago. Iman took out her phone and showed the detective their correspondence. Leo was panicking. He wrote that Tammy had found out the truth and made a terrible scene. She was throwing things, screaming, calling him a liar. He wanted to come stay with me for a few days, wait out the storm. I told him he could always count on me. Her voice trembled, and she covered her face with her hands. Onyekwa gave her time to calm down, then asked carefully, "What else do you know about the situation? Could Tammy be capable of violence?" Iman wiped her tears and took a deep breath. Leo never said she was aggressive. But, in recent months, he often mentioned her obsession with having a baby. He said she became a different person when it came to pregnancy. After the second failed IVF attempt, she didn't talk to him for a week, blaming him for all the problems, even though she knew donor sperm was being used. Leo was afraid that if she found out the whole truth, she would never forgive him. Do you think Tammy could have harmed your brother after finding out the truth? Iman stared out the window for a long time before answering. I don't know her personally, so I can't judge. But in our last conversation, Leo said something that now haunts me. I've never seen so much hatred in the eyes of someone I loved. He was really afraid of her reaction, detective, and apparently for good reason. After meeting with Iman, Onyekwa returned to the police station, where a new report from the forensic team was waiting for him. They had finished searching Bailey's apartment and found several important pieces of evidence. The most significant of these was Tammy's diary, hidden under a floorboard in the closet. Onyekwa opened the diary, wrapped in a plastic bag to preserve the evidence. The last entries were dated exactly 2 weeks earlier, the time when Dr. Darwish had casually mentioned Leonard's chromosomal abnormalities. Today, my world fell apart, Tammy wrote in shaky handwriting. I can't get the doctor's words out of my head. What did she mean when she talked about Leo's chromosomes? What have they been hiding from me all these years? I started looking for his medical records and found some strange medications in his personal medicine cabinet. Hormone pills. Why would he need those? The next entry was made 3 days later. I found a folder in his desk. Documents from a clinic in Detroit. Leona. My husband's name was Leona. He was a woman. All this time I've been living with a liar. All our attempts to have a baby were a farce. He knew we could never have a child together. My life is ruined. Onyekwa turned the page. The last entry was made the day before the murder, the handwriting almost illegible, as if written by a drunk or extremely agitated woman. I can't take it anymore. Every time I see his face, I feel sick at the thought that I kissed a woman, slept with a woman. It's disgusting. 7 years of my life stolen. 7 years of trying to conceive a child that was doomed from the start. I will never forgive him for this. Never. That was where the recording ended. The detective closed the diary, feeling that he had found the missing piece of the puzzle. The motive for the crime was crystal clear. Rage, despair, and a sense of betrayal that had been building up for 2 weeks and finally erupted into a brutal murder. Onyekwa gathered all the available evidence, surveillance camera footage showing that Tammy had lied about her whereabouts, Leonard's medical records, Dr. Darwish's testimony about the accidental disclosure of the secret, messages sent by Leonard to his sister, a diary containing direct threats and expressions of hatred, blood on a blouse hidden under the bed, blood-stained paper towels in the trash can. Everything pointed to the fact that Tammy Bailey, upon learning about her husband's past and realizing that her dream of having a biological child would never come true because of his deception, killed him in a fit of rage. She then cold-bloodedly created an alibi for herself by staging her return from work and discovering the body. The detective decided it was time for the final interrogation and indictment. He called the patrol service and ordered Tammy Bailey to be brought to the station for questioning. The killer was not to escape justice. Xavier Onyekwa stood at the whiteboard in the Waukesha Police Department conference room, studying the chronology of events and the connections between the pieces of evidence, arranged in a logical chain. In 2 days of investigation, the detective had managed to gather an impressive amount of evidence pointing to Tammy Bailey's guilt in the murder of her husband. Now it was time to put it all together before the decisive interrogation. Ricardo Morales, his partner, entered the room with a folder in his hands. "Here are the results of the DNA analysis of the physical evidence," he said, handing over the documents. "The blood on the blouse found under the bed belongs to Leonard Bailey. Traces of Tammy's makeup were also found on the collar, confirming that it is her clothing." Onyekwa nodded, attaching the new information to the board. "What about the knife?" "It still hasn't been found," Morales replied. "But there's something interesting. Tex checked additional cameras in the area, and one of them, near the dumpsters 3 blocks from Bailey's house, shows Tammy throwing something away around 5 p.m. on the day of the murder." The detective frowned. "Have the dumpsters been checked?" "They were emptied this morning, and the trash was sent to the city dump. I sent a team there, and they're combing through the unloading area right now." Less than an hour later, there was a knock at the door. Standing on the threshold was a young officer in a dirty uniform, holding a sealed evidence bag. "Detective Onyekwa, we found this in the trash." Judging by the area code, it's definitely from those containers. Inside the bag was a crumpled plastic bag containing a woman's denim jacket with brown stains on the sleeves and black gloves, also with traces of blood. At the bottom of the bag was a kitchen knife with a wooden handle that perfectly matched the set in Bailey's kitchen, where one knife was missing. "Send everything for express DNA analysis," Onyekwa ordered. "I need the results as soon as possible." "One more thing, Detective," the officer added, handing him a small plastic bag. "We found a receipt from a hardware store in Tammy Bailey's name. It's dated the day before yesterday, and the shopping list includes gloves identical to the ones in the bag." Onyekwa took the bag with the receipt and studied it carefully. The purchase had been made at 10 in the morning, the day before the murder. This indicated premeditation and planning, not a spontaneous act of rage. "Check the cameras in that store," he said to Morales. "I want to see her buying those gloves." 2 hours later, the entire team gathered in the conference room for a final briefing before the interrogation. The technician turned on the projector, and the recording from the surveillance camera in the hardware store appeared on the screen. It clearly showed Tammy Bailey selecting thick gardening gloves, then spending a long time looking at the knife section, but not buying anything there. She paid for the gloves and left. "She planned the murder," Onyekwa concluded. "She bought the gloves in advance but decided to use a knife from home, possibly to avoid leaving any trace of purchasing the murder weapon." The next entry showed Tammy leaving the house on the day of the murder with an empty bag in her hands, and then returning a few hours later with something heavy inside. "She left to get rid of the clothes and the murder weapon," Morales said. "The camera by the trash cans recorded her at 3:43 p.m. Onyekwa nodded, gathering all the documents into one folder. "We have enough evidence to make an arrest. We're ready for questioning." Tammy Bailey was brought to the station in handcuffs 20 minutes later. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and tangled hair. She was wearing the same clothes as yesterday, a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, now wrinkled after a night in a holding cell, where she had been placed under the pretext of her own safety. Detective Onyekwa met her in the interrogation room, a small room with a single table, 3 chairs, and a large mirror on the wall behind which was a surveillance room. A camera in the corner above the ceiling recorded every movement and word. "Mrs. Bailey," Onyekwa began, gesturing for her to sit down. "Thank you for agreeing to another conversation. Did I have a choice?" Tammy smiled bitterly as she sank into a chair. "Your officers handcuffed me in front of my neighbors like a criminal." "That's standard procedure," the detective replied calmly, laying out folders of documents in front of him. "We've found new evidence, and I'd like to discuss it with you." He took out the first photo, a frame from a surveillance camera in the stairwell, where Tammy had entered the building around 2 in the afternoon. According to this recording, you returned home at 2:03 p.m., not at 8 p.m. as you previously claimed. Can you explain this discrepancy? Tammy tensed, her eyes widening for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. I did go home at lunchtime. I forgot about it. I was too upset when I found Leo. I went back to get some headache medicine, then went back to work. Onyekwa placed a second photo in front of her, a recording from a camera near MedPharma. Your supervisor, Jamal Wilson, confirmed that you left work during your lunch break and did not return. What's more, the next day, the day of the murder, you didn't come to work at all, even though you claimed to have been there until 8 p.m. Tammy's face contorted with anger and fear. Are you following me? This is an invasion of privacy. This is a murder investigation, Mrs. Bailey, Onyekwa replied firmly, laying out the next photo, a shot from the hardware store where she bought gloves. You bought these gardening gloves the day before your husband died. Why? I have houseplants. My old gloves were torn. Her voice trembled, betraying her lie. Interesting, the detective nodded. Because we found those very gloves, Mrs. Bailey, along with your denim jacket and a kitchen knife from your set. He laid out on the table photographs of the evidence found in the trash. Tammy turned pale. Her hands began to tremble. That's not... You can't prove they're mine. But we already have, Onyekwa replied calmly. DNA testing confirmed that the blood on the jacket and knife belongs to Leonard Bailey. Epithelial cells matching your DNA were found on the inside of the gloves. And we have CCTV footage. He laid out another photo of you throwing a bag containing these items into a trash can at 3:43 p.m., a few hours after the murder. Tammy covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking, but she remained silent. Onyekwa decided to change tactics. He took out the medical records found in Bailey's apartment from another folder. We know about your husband's past, Mrs. Bailey. We know that before his sex change, his name was Leon. And we know that you found out about this 2 weeks ago after talking to Dr. Darwish. Tammy raised her head sharply, her eyes flashing with rage. She had no right. No one had the right to hide this from me. 7 years, detective. 7 years I lived a lie, slept with a man who deceived me every single day. Dr. Darwish said she accidentally mentioned your husband's chromosomal abnormalities, and that prompted you to start searching. You found his medical records, right? Yes, Tammy whispered, her anger replaced by emptiness. They were hidden in a box on the top shelf of the closet. I was looking for our IVF records, trying to understand why all our attempts had failed. And I found them. Papers from the clinic in Detroit, photos of when he was still her. And how did you react? Tammy smiled bitterly. How would you have reacted, detective? I screamed. I broke the mirror. Leo tried to explain that he was afraid of losing me, that he loved me. But what kind of love is based on lies? She fell silent, staring into the void in front of her. But that's not the point, she continued more quietly. The point is, he knew we could never have our own child. He knew how much I wanted to be a mother. He saw how I suffered after every failed IVF attempt. And he remained silent. He allowed me to hope, to spend money, to undergo painful procedures, for the sake of a dream that could never come true. Onyekwa listened attentively without interrupting. He saw how, with every word, Tammy sank deeper into memories of that day, how the barriers were breaking down. What happened on the day of the murder, Tammy? He asked gently, addressing her by name for the first time. Tell me. I didn't go to work, she began after a long pause. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. For 2 weeks I lived in hell. Leo and I hardly spoke. I couldn't look at him. He was going to stay with his sister for a few days and said he would give me time to think. In the morning, I left as if I were going to work, but I just wandered around the city, sat in cafes, tried to collect my thoughts. She took a deep breath and continued. Then I came home. Leo was packing his things. We started talking, calmly at first. He apologized, asked me to understand him, said that he had always felt like a man, that his body didn't match how he felt. But I couldn't listen. With every word he said, I realized more and more clearly that my life was ruined, that I would never be the mother of his child, that all our efforts, all my suffering, had been in vain. Tammy fell silent, twisting the hem of her t-shirt. What happened next? Onyekwa asked quietly. I don't remember exactly. We were yelling at each other. He said something like, "There are other ways to become parents. It doesn't have to be biological." And I just snapped. I grabbed a knife from the table and her voice broke. I didn't plan to kill him. Not then. I bought gloves just in case, thinking I might hit him, scare him. But when he started talking about adoption, as if it were an equivalent substitute, I just couldn't stop. Tears streamed down her face, but she continued to speak as if a dam had burst. He tried to defend himself, called for help, but I kept hitting him until he fell. Then I stood there, looking at him, at the blood, and realized what I had done. I took off my jacket and tried to wash the blood off in the bathroom, but realized the stains wouldn't come out. I hid it under the bed, then decided that was stupid, and hid it in my bag. "Why didn't you call the police right away?" Onyekwa asked. I panicked. I left the house to collect my thoughts, got rid of the evidence, then came back home and pretended I had just found him. I wasn't thinking clearly. Everything was a blur. Onyekwa nodded, making notes in his notebook. Then he closed it and looked Tammy straight in the eye. "Tammy Bailey, you are under arrest on suspicion of the first-degree murder of Leonard Bailey. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." As he read her the rights, 2 officers entered the room to take her to a cell. Tammy didn't resist, as if all her strength had left her. Before she was led away, she looked at the detective and said quietly, "You know, I really loved him." Before I found out the truth. Onyekwa watched the door close behind Tammy Bailey and felt the weight of the case settle on his shoulders. He gathered the documents from the table and left the interrogation room, heading to his office to finish the report. Ricardo Morales was waiting for him with coffee and a donut. "Great work, Xavier," he said, handing him a cup. "A clean confession, all the evidence in place. The prosecutor will be pleased." Onyekwa nodded, accepting the coffee, but feeling no satisfaction from the solved case. "You know, Ricardo, sometimes I think that behind every crime there is a story that began long before the act of violence itself. Years of silence, fear, lies, a time bomb that eventually explodes." "Philosophizing?" Morales smiled. "It's just another domestic murder. She found out her husband used to be a woman, couldn't handle it, and killed him. Classic motive, rage over betrayal." "Maybe," Onyekwa replied thoughtfully, "but I think the real tragedy here runs deeper. Leonard was afraid of being rejected for his truth and chose to live a lie. Tammy desperately wanted to be a mother and couldn't accept a reality where that was impossible. They both backed themselves into a corner with no way out." Morales shrugged and returned to his desk, leaving Onyekwa alone with his thoughts. The detective opened a file on his computer and began typing the final report on the Bailey case, detailing all the evidence and the suspect's confession. An hour later, having finished his work, he sent the document to his superiors and leaned back in his chair, feeling exhausted after 2 sleepless nights. His thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. It was Eamon Calloway, Leonard's sister. "Detective Onyekwa? I've come to Waukegan to collect my brother's belongings and arrange the funeral. They said you could give me the keys to the apartment, as it is no longer considered a crime scene. Yes, of course, replied Onyekwa. I can meet you at the house in an hour, if that's convenient for you. Iman agreed, and the detective gathered the necessary documents and went to meet her. She was already waiting at the entrance when he arrived. In the daylight, her resemblance to her brother was even more striking. The same expressive eyes, the same jawline. We've completed all the necessary procedures, Onyekwa said, handing her the keys. You can take Leonard's personal belongings. If you need any help, Officer Johnson, he pointed to the patrolman standing by the car, we'll assist you. Thank you, Iman replied quietly. I heard you. Found the killer. Yes, the detective nodded. Tammy confessed to the murder. She will be charged with first-degree murder. Iman looked at him for a long time, then asked, why did she do it? Because she found out about Leo's past? Partly, Onyekwa replied cautiously, but mainly because she realized she couldn't have a biological child with your brother. Tammy was deeply emotionally attached to the idea of motherhood, and the collapse of that dream was unbearable for her. Iman nodded sadly. I told him that lying never leads to anything good, that if he really loved this woman, he should be honest with her. But Leo, he was so afraid of losing her. He wrote to me that he had met the woman of his dreams, but she came from a conservative family and dreamed of having a large family with children. He thought that if he told her the truth at the beginning of their relationship, she would leave him. And then it was too late. They were already married, and he didn't know how to confess. It's a tragic story, said Onyekwa, but nothing justifies murder. Of course not, agreed Iman. I'm not defending her. It's a shame it ended this way. Leo deserved better. They went up to the apartment, and Iman began packing her brother's things, carefully folding his clothes into the suitcase she had brought with her. Onyekwa helped her, taking things from the top shelves of the wardrobe. On one of them, he found a photo album and handed it to Iman. She opened it and froze, staring at the first page. There was a photo of Leo and Tammy, taken, apparently, several years ago. They were standing on the beach, embracing each other, with broad smiles on their faces. They looked truly happy. He really loved her, Iman said quietly, running her fingers over the photo. And I think she loved him too. Before the truth destroyed everything, Onyekwa nodded silently. There were no winners in this story, only victims of their own fears, expectations, and inability to accept each other for who they were. Iman closed the album and carefully placed it in the suitcase, along with her brother's other mementos. His books, his favorite mug, old letters, everything that remained of a man whose life had been tragically cut short because of a secret he was too afraid to reveal. I'm going to bury him in Detroit, next to our grandmother, Iman said, closing the suitcase. She was the only one in the family who accepted him for who he was. Onyekwa helped her carry the items to the car and shook her hand as he said goodbye. If you need any help or have any questions about the case, call me anytime. Iman nodded and, before getting into the car, took a small photo out of her bag and handed it to him. This is what my brother was like, detective. Not a victim, not a fraud, just a man who wanted to be loved. In the photo, a young Leonard was smiling as he hugged his sister with Lake Michigan in the background. His eyes shone with happiness and hope for a future that was not to be.